they are so important to make companies more resilient and ready for recovery, and also for their imagination of a new possible. So I'm sure that today we will really learn a lot from our speakers. Let me give you some instructions and indication on how this webinar is organized. The webinar will last approximately 75 minutes. There will be a short introduction, then we will have our moderated discussion with the speakers, a short presentation on a new tool that UNDP is working on to support companies on their diversity and inclusion journey. And finally, we will have also a Q&A session. Therefore, we ask you to please write down your questions for the panelists throughout the webinar in the Q&A box that you find at the bottom of your Zoom screen. While you can leave the chat box for just maybe sharing some insights or comments or maybe links that you think that would be beneficial for the audience. When you write in the chat box, please indicate that you are writing to all panelists and all attendees, so everybody can benefit from your comment. We will not give the floor to people we are not able to allow you to speak, so therefore just use the Q&A box or the chat box. And my colleagues in UNDP will help me to keep track of that, so that later we can ask maybe many questions to our speakers. I think that before introducing the speakers to you, I would like to pass the floor to my colleague, Ko Mia Hoi, Gender Advisor at UNDP Bangkok Regional Hub, who will give you an overview of the objectives of this webinar.
Thank you, Liviana. Thank you, Liviana, and hello, everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar, and I'm really impressed to see the high level of interest from different countries of the world on the topic of inclusive responses to the COVID-19 crisis, led and supported by the private sector in the region. Of course, it's impossible to stay away from the crisis for anyone. We are still in the midst of this unprecedented and challenging crisis wherever we are. The outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic is much more than a health crisis. It has triggered a global economic crisis, and it's also a care crisis. And it's posing a risk to maintain a fair, equal, and inclusive society. The COVID-19 crisis is worsening the existing inequalities and creating new inequalities. While it is affecting everyone, the crisis is not affecting everyone the same way. Women and girls are being differently impacted and could face disproportionate economic, health, and social risks. How so? Globally, women make up 70% of the workers in the health and social sector. Women also dominate in the service industry, a sector that has been significantly impacted by the crisis, with a large number of employees losing their jobs. Small and informal businesses associated with the service and tourism sectors also have a large proportion of women workers, and their livelihoods are now disappearing. Talking about precarious job security, women also dominate the region's manufacturing sector, such as the garment factories, as underpaid and underprotected workers. We've seen some global retailers closing down their businesses, and it doesn't take much effort to understand how this may have impacted on those vulnerable women workers. Essential services required for survivors of gender-based violence are being compromised as the resources are getting reprioritized. And those women who could keep their job during the crisis by shifting to remote working modalities, reorganizing the space and time at home with increased care responsibilities, and balancing private and work life, have exposed just how much our societies have been depending on women's unpaid care and domestic work. The crisis has also challenged many of our widely accepted norms and perceptions. People are encouraged to stay home because home is considered safe, but home isn't safe for everyone. Concerns about the crisis-induced increase in domestic violence and abuse is real. people used to think working from home is good for women as it gives flexibility to the women who need to juggle multiple care and unpaid tasks at home. The crisis revealed that the reality of unpaid work is not that simple. We are facing the risk of losing the gains over our societies have made for gender equality, but we have the opportunity, we have the choice to turn this crisis into a positive outcome for gender equality. To make our societies more resilient against potential future shocks, gender equality is essential. Just holding on to the gains our societies have already made isn't going to be enough. In searching for a new normal, the voice of the private sector is more than ever critical. We need to revisit and adjust our thinking on the world of work, and the perspectives of the private sector will play a significant role in doing so. Today, we're here to hear the voices of companies in Asia that are leading on diversity and inclusion, to learn how this crisis has had an impact on their businesses, and particularly how their D&I practices have been affected and adapted, and how they played a role in making their companies more resilient and better equipped to respond to the crisis. This webinar has been brought together by a few initiatives of UNDP in the region, namely the Transforming the Future of Work for Gender Equality Project and the Diversity and Inclusion Platform of the Fair Business Environment in ASEAN project. I hope you will enjoy the webinar. Thank you. Thank you, Liviana.
Thank you, Cobb. Thank you very much for this introduction. Now I would like to introduce the speakers to our audience. I will just give you some information about who they are and what they will share with us. We have here with us today Gaurav Gupta, Partner and Asia Director of Dahlberg Advisors. Dahlberg is a global strategy and policy advisory firm that focuses on global development. And Gaurav is the founder of Dahlberg in Asia. Currently, he's advising clients on how to reorient and reprogram their activities in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Gaurav is also a champion on gender equality, and for example, he sits on the board of Educate Girls, one of India's largest NGO focused on girl education and empowerment. Thank you, Gaurav, and welcome. We have also Gaynor Reid, Vice President Communications and CSR Asia Pacific at Accor Hotels. She's based in the company regional office in Singapore. She has worked for Accor for over 20 years, and she oversees the group communication strategy, corporate social responsibility, and crisis management. Accor has offices across 21 countries only in Asia Pacific and over 1,000 hotels. Gaynor also sits on the executive committee for Asia Pacific. She's a strong advocate for women in the industry and also mentoring programs. She also supports several women from disadvantaged backgrounds to seek employment and training opportunities. Welcome, Gaynor. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
And finally, we have Rojit Ranjan, Director, Corporate Responsibility Asia Pacific for Sodexo, a world leader serving 100 million customers around the world in the areas of food services and facilities management. Rojit is responsible for the design and execution of the Better Tomorrow 2025, which is Sodexo Corporate Responsibility Roadmap. And of course, he is leading also on the areas of diversity and inclusion. More recently, Rojit is leading the Asia Pacific business plan for return to work following the COVID-19 pandemic. And now that you know a little bit more about them, welcome again to all of them. Thank you for your time. I would like to start the conversation. I would like to start with posing the first question to Gaurav. You know, Gaurav, we watched a fabulous video that was put together by the India team on Split the List. So this video explains how Indian women do 10 times more unpaid care work than men, and the challenges related to COVID-19 has further increased the situation. And in this video, you also talk about an interesting concept, the one on time poverty. And you advocate for a more equal distribution of unpaid care work in the household. Would you like to tell us more about this campaign, how you came about this idea, how it was motivated, and also how was maybe the reception of this campaign, as well as in general what Dalberg is doing to support female employees?
Thanks, Liliana. Sure, thank you. No, I think that video is a good place to start, but just to say that, you know, this idea of time poverty is obviously nothing new. It goes to the heart of many challenges that women face, and challenges that then obviously go into the workplace, because there's this whole set of unrecognized work. It doesn't show up in GDP. It's highly unequal. You know, in India, the stats might be 10x, but that's actually not that unusual. I think, you know, and it's not just unusual from a developing country perspective as well. You can take some of the most advanced economies, ones that we may have a perception that are quite equal, and you'll still see a multiple with respect to the difference between unpaid work that women do versus men. There are stats even for places like Sweden, for example, there'll be 2-3x to what men do. So this is a big challenge. It's unrecognized, and it affects women at work deeply. Just to look at the lockdown, even since we're talking about COVID, right? And these are, I know, mind-boggling numbers because India is large, but there are 320 million students who are now at home. There are 100 million elderly people who are at home needing a whole new different type of care because of the lockdown. There's 50 million workers who would normally be household help who are back in their own homes. So that's what's happening in the system, right? Hundreds of millions of people with newer and greater care needs and less people available to provide those care needs. And it's even if you look at some of the survey work that we've been doing recently, that means already starting from a base of where women are doing 10x what men are doing, there's been a 30% increase in terms of unpaid work that women are experiencing during times of COVID. So a lot of this really just builds on that thinking around time poverty, around how that is one of the critical levers, not the only one, in trying to get to a more equal place in society, and it has a huge impact, obviously, on work. Now, how do we make this video, and why did we do it, and so forth? Frankly, there's no strategy behind it. Our approach to gender in-house, as opposed to what we do for our clients, obviously, gender is an area we work a lot with our clients on, but in-house is actually to get out of the way. You know, the trick to it for us is, how do you set the overall frame, push a certain type of culture, but then get out of the way? I mean, a lot of the work that's coming out of gender, out of Dalberg, is done by very junior teams who are passionate about something. And so that video, for example, was something that was completely dreamed up by actually a fairly junior team who was both experiencing this at a personal level, but also very passionate about it, and decided let's actually try and create a little bit of awareness and a movement. And they were very deliberate. You know, they aimed it at double income families. They tried to bring in people from very different industries to make sure that the message resonated. But I think our approach to all of this, especially around our own internal gender work, is to actually let leadership rise in this space internally, and actually encourage it. So I think that's why we put that video out there, because a few people were very passionate, but it does build on a long-term perspective around this whole idea of time poverty, which really manifests itself right from the grassroots of women spending hours on collecting you know, water and fuel for cooking, which is often how it used to be talked about, right up to a very sort of urban, upper middle to rich class of, you know, double income families and so forth, and really unequal work happening just at the home level itself. And I think this is a really great space for us to look at when we're thinking about what are the policies that workplaces should be thinking about during this crisis and even post this crisis, because the care burden has really increased, and it's very clear that the care burden falls disproportionately on women. I mean, one simple thing we've tried to do, and this is a little bit band-aid, but is we as soon as the crisis happened, we turned all of our sick leave and said you can use sick leave for care. You know, no questions asked. You don't have to be sick. You can say, hey, I have parents at home that now need extra care. I have children at home, and people are able to use their sick leave. It's a small way on how we can start to think about this extra burden.
Thank you very much, Gaurav. It was really interesting. Some points particularly strike my attention. For example, the fact that sometimes some small change can really help change things. For example, this idea of using the sick leave for care is certainly a good point. And I like also the importance that you gave to junior people and young people and capitalizing on their ideas. It is really important also to partner with youth if we really want to be transformative and maybe changing some stereotypes that are actually holding all of us back. And then the other issue that you touched upon was the increased level of stress under which women at home can be posed if they need to manage these increased care responsibilities on top maybe of work from home modalities. So this brings me to my second question, which is for Gaynor. I know that earlier last month, Michael Isenberg, the CEO of Accor Asia Pacific, announced that recognizing that employees are facing reduced hours or stand downs, and this is causing enormous stress, Accor is committed to offering assistance to protect the mental health and also physical well-being of their teams to ensure that they can go through with this, and also they can maybe become even stronger for the phase when the rebound will come. So can you tell us more about these initiatives that looks really very interesting, and again share how it was designed and maybe how it is being also perceived by your workforce? Gaynor, over to you.
Sure, I can. Well, I guess for us, we call our team members heartists because they provide the heart of our business. It's a combination of hospitality and artistry from the heart. So they are the heart of our business, which means we have to protect them. And this is something I think that's not just happening through this crisis. We've always been a company that cares for our employees, but I think the recognition that our industry in particular has been very, very much devastated by this crisis. No one's traveling. So we have hotels where we don't have any guests. So even at the outset of the crisis in China, our development team had come up with a well-being app for China specifically. And that's still being used even now as China is coming out of the crisis. Then we've introduced a lot of things across the region. So we have a well-being app where people can exercise with their team members, get together, have a challenge with each other so they can motivate one another. We've got podcasts and webinars on how to talk to your children about COVID. You know, how to find the real stories in social media, tips to stay safe and well at home, how to work smartly from home. We've also provided a lot of training programs for them that they can do through partnerships with eCornell. So it's basically understanding that people are feeling separate from their colleagues, you know, divorced from their usual positions, and just making sure that we can keep people motivated, inspired through the crisis to come out bigger and better.
Thank you very much, Gaynor. I think this is really important. I think it's great also for the employees to feel that they are an important part, they are the most important resource. So of course it really gives also such a peace of mind to know that your employer is taking care, is allowing you to put health first. Certainly we face like isolation and disruption of daily routine, and many people unfortunately also experience these health problems themselves or some of their loved ones. So I really like also this approach that I would call maybe humanistic approach that put the person at the center. And I hope these ideas will guide also maybe our new normal, possibly in when we are building back. Now I would like to ask my question to Roshit. So Sodexo is one of the companies also most successful in having developed and implemented a DEI strategies that is really very comprehensive and applied to all functions of business. And I know that in 2018, Sodexo conducted a gender balance study that found out that companies with gender balance management score higher on several key performance indicators, including, for example, employment engagement and retention, and safety at the workplace, which I think is also very relevant in this context of COVID-19, where if we want people to go back to companies and to the workplace, we need to ensure the safety of a place. Can you tell us more also on what do you think that with COVID-19 has changed in this? Did you experience any setbacks, or instead you feel that these D&I policies are still, let's say you are holding on to them and actually they are making you stronger? Over to you.
So Liviana, the simple answer to the question is nothing has changed. But let me retrack and provide a bit more context to that. First of all, thank you for the opportunity to invite Sodexo to be a part of this session following our August meeting in the Regional Bureau in Bangkok. Some of you would have heard about Sodexo, so let me start a little bit about who the company itself is so that you understand the context before I explain the other things. For those who don't know, don't worry, because if there were ever a list created for the biggest companies that no one has heard about, I'm sure Sodexo will be in the top few of that list. It's not your fault, it's more our fault in the lack of communication historically. But if there was another list, and we have another list where we are in the top few of certain other external rating agencies, like the Diversity Inc. put Sodexo within the Hall of Fame of companies, more recently out of a handful of companies, or through the Dow Jones Sustainability Index, which rated Sodexo as one of the industry leader for 15 years in a row. But the company itself is a services company. We employ more than 460,000 employees around the world who are part of our payroll, making us within the top 20 largest private employers in the world. But the nature of the job is on the services side. It's providing food as a service to the students in a school or a university, to adults at work in an office environment, to patients in a hospital, to miners in a mining site, etc., etc. But also we do the facilities management of the buildings where our clients are present. So we are more a B2B4C company. And because of the nature of this business, we, just like Accor, is heavily impacted because it's the service sector. It's the lower wage, typically categorized as the lower wage type of employees, where there's a strong domination of women within that, as well as minority within that group. But over the last couple of decades, we have started putting into measure a lot of aspects around diversity and inclusion, including things coming from top down, having a strategy, having performance objectives at all levels linked to, or bonuses linked to diversity and inclusion. We knew there was a powerful story and a powerful differentiation coming from the D&I space, but we wanted to put some numbers behind it, because it's not that people were necessarily asking us what's the business case. But if you're asking the question, what is the business case for D&I, you are in the wrong century. So, but we still wanted to reinforce our message saying, what are the numbers? And we're not surprised by the numbers, honestly. And the numbers, when we did the survey across, or a study across 50,000 of our managers, which is not a small sample space, across 70 countries, what it revealed is when there is a gender balance ratio of 40 to 60% women-men or men-women, such teams outperform the other teams on profitability by 8%, on safety by 12%, on employee engagement by 14%, and so on. So this once again reinforced the message of the why we are doing what we are doing. So to answer to your question, nothing has changed. since then till now. If things have changed, then it's not who we are as a company. I'll give you a couple of examples of what we have done during the period of COVID. The first one is the employee relief program that we have put into place, which is a pot of 30 million euros. And this is coming from employees within Sodexo, the senior leadership, from the CEO to the board to the senior executives, who have given up 50% of their salary or given up their bonuses. For example, I have given up my bonus to be a part of this pot. And this pot goes to other employees who are at the front line, not even the site managers, but really the frontline staffs who are faced with a potential layoff or a layoff that is happening. So it's not going to our bottom line and improving our profitability, but it's really by the employees, for the employees, which is what we are as a team spirit company, for our values, standing shoulder to shoulder next to our fellow employees. So that's a powerful program because, as I mentioned before, a large number of our workforce are women. And when our client sites, as you can imagine, we are operating buildings, offices, campuses, etc. And it's a totally in-home world. So there are less that is happening outside from a volume, from a closure, etc. And naturally, as a percentage, women are impacted. So this is going to support them during this period and not for our bottom line. So that's one of the examples of reinforcing our inclusion and diversity. The second one is really how do we work with our suppliers, especially women-owned businesses, women-owned enterprises, and including them into our supplier mix. So globally, we had a target of 10 billion of our business value will go into benefiting such SMEs, women-owned, minority-owned enterprises. And that is once again being reinforced, saying that we'll continue to work. More than 25% of our purchasing spend recently has come from those businesses. And we continue even in China, for example, during the period of the lockdown, we were working with our SME or women-owned businesses to get them to get the necessary certification with WeConnect as one of the examples to go ahead. So nothing has changed. Everything is even more reinforced as we go through this. And we in fact have a campaign that we are running around the world saying that carry on. So diversity and inclusion never stops. So that's what, these are probably three examples or a few examples of what we are doing.
Thank you very much, Rashid. And sorry if you saw me disappearing for a while. I got some internet challenges, but I managed to capture most of your response, luckily. I really like the fact that you demonstrate also, as it was from a previous speaker, the attention to your workforce. So know who is working for you, and the fact that you recognize that there is not just the top level, there is the very bottom, the base. And in a company like yours, which is a giant in terms of how many people you employ, there are many that really comes from the more maybe vulnerable part of a society. And I find interesting that you put some resources to understand more what is the value also of employing this diversity. And also this, I really like the idea of also some of the more some of the employees being able even to donate their bonus for those that are more at risk. I think that this also promotes another value that is really necessary to go through this crisis together, which is solidarity. And I'm really glad to have heard all your different experiences, but all giving some good tips. So what we hope also with this webinar is to help maybe cross-fertilize, give some ideas that can be put in place also by other companies. Also maybe some that don't have this big dimension as you do. So now I would like to go back again to Gaurav. And my question is this, Gaurav. So Dalberg has offices at least in 5 countries in Asia, and we know that your company is really working to ensure diversity and inclusion in within itself, but it's also helping other companies to do that and to push for more gender equality. And indeed, you are now also advising companies to respond to this crisis. Can you give us also some insights on the challenges that you see that these companies in Asia Pacific are facing in this regard? How do you think you will be able to show them that the D&I is actually a key enabler for a response rather than maybe something that now they will not have time to think about?
Thanks, Liviana. I mean, I do think that the answer to your last question has really been well presented by Gaynor and Rashid. I think who've shown that, I mean, such large companies being able to actually not just do the right thing, but also drive really important value from that, from doing the right thing. But I guess maybe a way to think about it is that, you know, we think of this whole question on gender and inclusivity at 3 levels, right? One is, it's a topic in its own right. It's a product in its own right. And especially for an advisory firm like ours, there is a whole gender practice, right? People, this is an important issue. It has a set of things that are very peculiar to it. And so there's a team that goes and looks at both the research, how to help people to think about applying that from a social impact perspective, right? And especially in our space, which is very much on social impact, it's a very easy sort of equation to say that investing in women and girls has really strong outcomes for society, right? So there's a question of gender as a topic in its own right. And I think even every business model out there can actually think about how gender itself is something as part of their product suite. Because even if you're a consumer product, right, there's a whole thing around how you actually think about gender as itself, something to think about in developing your products. The second is gender lens. So one is your product. The second is the process by which you get to your product, and ensuring that there's a gender lens to that. So in our case, we've taken on a commitment as of the middle of last year, which is that we don't really care what the client is asking. No matter what they're asking, a gender lens is going to be put into the advice that Dalberg gives. And that actually means that as we think about what is that final piece of analysis and advisory, we provide gender disaggregated views on that advice. We ensure that that advice is informed by gender disaggregated data. and frankly, it's a little bit like what Rashid and Gaynor shared. That's just made us better people, right? It's not purely, it's driven out of the values of the firm and culture, but it's made us much better advisors, because there has been that lack sometimes of recognizing that even when you give advice and how it gets implemented, that actually there's a huge gender dimension to it. And it is, so we have a whole set of toolkits. We have people who come in and look at that issue for us on each of our projects to ensure that we're actually disaggregating advice right from the get-go on the gender. So that's our process, but I think that applies to every business. How are you thinking about a gender lens in the process by which you finally get to your product? And then the final area, which I think is probably the thing that gets the most attention, is also important, is the gender inside your company, right? Which is, how do you also walk the talk? And so how do you ensure that you're living these values? How are you showing that you're inclusive in your practices? So to me, there are these 3 levels: product, process, and then just walking the talk yourself. And I think what would be great, if I look across the kind of questions that clients ask us, is to really shift to the process side. There's a huge focus on how we're walking the talk, and I think it is great to share the kind of like inputs that come out of these kind of webinars, for example. There's some great tips and tricks that we can all learn. And there's obviously people who already have gender as a topic, in which case you're already talking preaching to the converted, right? There are people who will ask us, okay, how do we make investments that really keep gender at the heart of what we're doing? How do we design social programs around these things? But process is the one that I think unlocks a huge amount of value. If in every aspect you think about applying a gender lens, and I'm already hearing that from Gaynor and Rashid, that that's automatically part of how they're thinking about their people policies, right? That's what I think will unlock a lot of values for businesses. To recognize that, I'll give you an example. we have either firms, in some cases politicians, different people, all really focused right now on trying to provide greater digital access. There was a case a year ago of almost 5 million phones being given out to women in India for a particular state. Now, what are the reasons behind that? The fact that there was no thought process to the design of how that was being received and who ultimately would take those phones meant that actually the program was set up for failure. Right? Because the reality of digital divide, especially in a lot of the poor households, is that it's actually the access is very male controlled. And actually designing around that is really critical. It similarly is true for any IT company or telco company that's trying to introduce product. Not applying a gender lens to the process of how they're deciding on the design of the applications, the design of the hardware, how these things are distributed, is actually losing value for them. And in effect, not addressing the huge access divide that digital has between men and women. So to me, I think that's the space that really we can also start focusing on, not just what's the end product, where someone's already thinking about gender, not just how do I make sure that I'm walking the talk, very important, but how do you apply a gender lens into every step of the process? Because that will both unlock value and I think deliver more justice.
Thank you, Roshit.
Excuse me. Thank you. Thank you, Gaurav. I really found your response very interesting with the idea of also the importance of applying gender lens throughout the process, and also your approach of bringing this gender lens and your gender practice to all the companies and all your clients. I think it's a great way to start changing things. And it was interesting also your reflection to the digital access. So even the digital access can pose these problems in terms of, let's say, digital divide and a gender aspects. Also in this case, women may have more difficulties. So we need also to take this into consideration if we really want to empower women. My next question is again for Gaynor. I know that Accor has established already some years ago RISE. This is an international network both for women and men supporting diversity as a key level of performance, a network of women and men who are committed to the values of sharing knowledge, of solidarity, and combating stereotypes. Can you tell us more about this initiative and also maybe how it's changed with the COVID-19? Are you being able to further maybe capitalize on this during this time? And is this also helping to support your employees?
Yeah, okay. Well, for us, we have made a commitment many years ago, back in 2012, to reaching gender equity and pay equity. But I think when it comes to diversity and inclusion, we can't just talk about gender. It's also about having people from different cultures, different backgrounds, different colors, different everything, even age groups. So if you look at our executive committee in Asia Pacific, we have almost 40% women on that, but it's not just about having women, it's having, people from different countries and cultures as well. With RISE, what we really need to make real change is to have men supporting women through that as well, because if you look culturally, the men typically have the positions in power and they will hire people who are like them, so you get more men. So RISE is all about having men stand up for women. And Accor was one of the first signatories with the United Nations He for She program. So I think we'd already been recognized. We've made a commitment to have 50% women general managers in the future. Now that's not going to happen easily. Gaurav was talking about India before. It's okay for us to say as a company, we want to have 50% women general managers, But in India, women don't come forward for those positions. Or sometimes an owner will say, well, I don't really want a woman general manager. So we need a cultural shift as well. We can't just say as a company, this is what we're aiming for. But we're certainly working towards it. And I think the other thing is that we have those CSR goals are linked to our general managers' bonuses as well. So there's a real incentive for them, not just because it makes better business, but because it actually it impacts on their bottom line. But I mean, I think we all know that a more inclusive workplace is obviously a happier workplace and also a more productive workplace.
Thank you, Gaynor. I really like also your point about expanding the idea diversity and inclusion beyond gender and beyond women, and also the observation that we shouldn't just focus on the numbers, and it's not just a matter of ticking the box of have 30% women, but it's also a matter of building also the confidence of these women that they can aspire to cover some position. So this is also very, very linked to all the issue of building leadership skills and giving these resources. So I think that networks like RISE may be really important because they open up to these mentorship programs. You know that maybe you have someone that is maybe not your direct boss or but that can give you this advice. I think it is really very much welcome and needed, and not only for women, but in general also all junior people can benefit from these initiatives. Great. Now I'm proceed to Roshit, and my question for you, Roshit, is about some initiative I've learned about again put in place by Sodexo. And initiatives that have had positive outcomes, particularly also for female employees, such as, for example, FLOW, which is a workplace initiative, meaning flexibility optimizes work. So I'm thinking if it is about flexible working modalities, it may be probably very relevant in the current situation. And also, I've learned about a community initiative on ending gender-based violence. Can you tell us more about these two programs and also maybe how they were affected in this period during this crisis?
Sure, Liviana. So let me start with the topic of gender-based violence, or more narrow it down into actually ending domestic violence, which is a huge topic in the current context that we are living in. For example, just a city in Hubei during the period of lockdown in February had 300% more cases of domestic violence as compared to the year before, 300%. And then if you, other numbers coming out from India, from Singapore, from Indonesia, showing 33% increase. So the background, there are two factors that we need to consider. And both are important. One is the increasing number of phone calls that are coming through helplines, hotlines, etc., asking for support. But we also see the other side of the story, and we also hear the other side of the story, is that those calls that used to come before is no longer coming through right now. And the reason for the second category is because the women who are still living in the household are still living with the abusers who have been part of that household for a while and don't have access to call out, to reach out, and to gain help or to gain support. For example, it even prompted India, some of the organizations in India, to slip through the helpline numbers within the ration cards that women usually carry and go to the ration or provision store under the government to get the food, so that it's another way to get through and to get through this access. So that's the background, and from a Sodexo perspective, we have implemented this program once again because we saw it, because of the nature of our workforce, we could hear it, and as a part of the earlier Clinton Global Initiative is when we started this program of ending domestic violence, and we have trained 70,000 managers or employees around the world on this program. And in particular, if I have to zoom into India, we have gone through a detailed training program with 12,000 of our employees on understanding, and this has been done through in partnership with an NGO, but also through our own internal gender networks, to make this program available and to teach them and to train them and support them to reach out on these aspects. And what came out strongly during the training program was that women in general, once again, statistics says that 55% of the women consider violence as a necessary part of marriage in India. They justify the reason that this is normal, because if their husband beats them up or abuses them, it's because of them and themselves. Either they did not take care of their children, they neglected the children, or they stepped out of the house, or they were on the phone with someone else. So it's really opening up the minds, and not just on paper, but really opening up the minds. What is considered as gender-based violence or domestic violence is very different from many other parts of the world. And 77% of the men feel threatened with their masculinity if the wives or their partners don't listen to them. So it's that double whammy that creates this issue. And the awareness program raised that profile of our employees in understanding better, provided the support system on what needs to be done if something were to go wrong, and all this helped. And this, like I mentioned, we partnered with Majlis, which is one of the NGOs that we worked with in India, whose founder itself went through a domestic abuse case and created this program in support of legal support for other women. So we partnered with such NGOs. We also worked around projects to include or to employ such women by giving them opportunities within Sodexo as our own employees, especially acid attack victims, burn victims, coming out of this violence as an issue. So it's going to be increasingly important, and it's a taboo topic in many parts. Nobody wishes to talk, especially the men. So it needs to be addressed at the very heart of it. And if you don't address it now, because, for example, people are going through a lot of psychological issues or mental issues being stuck at home. In India, for example, many alcohol establishments, sometimes run by the government, are even closed. So lack of access to alcohol is creating much more abuse at home, or even tobacco is creating much more. So there is a need to be mindful about all this as it goes through. So that's on the first one, on ending domestic violence. On the next topic that you spoke about, flow, as you mentioned, is flexibility optimizes workflow. We do have this tendency to play around with the words, so forgive us if it is too complex. But at the essence of it, it's all about telling our managers, telling our people, let's go with the flow. The flow of the world right now is changing, and let's adapt and change with that flow in providing much more flexibility and options for our people, for men, for women, irrespective of where they work from. They can work from anywhere. It could be formal, it could be informal. Informal, if you have a child recital, so you can step out on that particular day and say that you have something, you can go it. So it's not a one-page policy or something like that. It's really a program with its own brand and videos coming from the leadership to make it much more open, so that if it is a policy that sits somewhere with an HR, not many people will want to take those flexible options, because it could be seen as taboo, or am I the exceptions and no. So really talking about it in a much more open framework from a leadership, and asking more men also to come and ask for flexible options, because historically it's been typically more women coming and asking for flexible options. So we don't want that bias too. So really making things very open in that space. So although we did this program before the COVID happened, and the whole remote working has become a huge topic. So we are trying to adapt that program for a post-COVID or the next normal world, while still maintaining today the flexibility that already existed with the flow, plus the other add-ons. So these are the two examples that you spoke about yeah.
That's great. Thank you, Roshit. I really noticed I need to keep track of time, but I'm being carried away from your stories and the initiatives you talk about. I like in particular also a very relevant initiative on combating violence, gender-based violence, and I liked also the point of cooperation with NGOs. I think this is a good example of multi-stakeholder cooperation. We cannot solve anything by ourselves, so also partnering between civil society, NGOs, and business is really key, and is a very nice idea. And also, I think you mentioned that this program is running in India, and I hope you will have the chance to replicate, or that more companies will try to do this kind of programs, because actually, unfortunately, this is a problem all over the world. I know there is also a Russian saying about this acceptance of violence as a sign of love, which I really think is terrible, but all over the world, this is an issue that we are really need to address. And also, I liked the second message that you give about the need of adaptability and the flexibility that, well, I think is the only way we need to respond as of now. And I like the idea of bringing this option of flexible work already at the time before the crisis as something that is really there to be used, and not something that maybe you have to be afraid of using because you may be judged negatively. Now, so I will speed up to the last question I have for you. So then we can proceed and get a few questions also from the public. I have a question which is the same for all of you, so you can just respond maybe very briefly with an idea. I think I would like you to tell me which actions maybe were triggered in your companies, in particular in this crisis situation, to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic, but have the potential to result in a more long-term change, and possibly in a positive change. Would you be able to tell me something about this? Who wants to start? Gaurav.
Oh, thanks, Liliana. I'll be very quick. I mean, first, I just wanted to reflect on things that both Gaynor and Rashid said. I think on gender violence, one of the interesting things is I'm not sure we fully apply a gender lens to tackling gender violence. So one of the interesting comparisons I've been trying to study, and we still need data to come out, but it's certainly very interesting, is if you look at France, you know, France has had quite a huge surge in gender violence, and their practice is that, similar to like in India and other places, let's find shelters, there's spaces running out in women's shelters for women that are experiencing these things. Across the border in Denmark, they're not sending women to shelters, they're sending men to shelters. And you know, there's a real interesting question on why should women leave their homes when they're experiencing violence? Why shouldn't men leave the home? Right? It's an interesting thing. Like, you just wonder, how did the policy come in? Did we apply a gender lens? Did we ask women, is that what they want? Because actually, one of the things that women don't want, and why they often don't complain, is they don't want to leave the home. Right? Like, that's so I think there's some really interesting things to just look at. And I'd love to hear more from Gaynor about this 50% target. I think targets are a really impressive way of getting people mobilized. And I think there's probably a lot of interesting things as part of that journey. I know that when we, when I started about 11 years ago with like one employee, the aim was, how do you get leadership that is going to be equal? And when you then go into when you're starting out, all your leadership needs to come from outside. When you start on that journey, you have to hire from the outside. And so you're beholden to the ecosystem, just like what Gaynor was saying. It's like, hang on, I'm getting 90% male applicants. And we actually spent the last 11 years really trying to focus on creating an internal ecosystem, because we can't control the outside world, but trying to create an internal ecosystem that self-generates women leadership. To the extent we have somewhat the opposite issue right now, because 70% management team members are women. But I think that's, in some ways, I know there's a lot of pressure on companies, but I think this idea of patience and working with the bits that you can control, and then letting gender be an emergent property of that, is really something that I think can work really well for companies. In terms of your question, I'm sure everyone will talk about this. clearly this has pushed us, COVID-19 has pushed us to be more flexible, and flexible work policies. We're forced into an uncomfortable zone around flexibility, but we're then finding, look, it can work. And that can definitely play into a stronger gender hand, especially in a world in which still, and I know the frank truth is for the foreseeable future, care work will fall more on women. So flexibility really helps, and we can probably continue that beyond COVID-19. Work from home, which people have tried, but now they've just dive right into the deep end, can be something that can be really helpful in providing that flexibility. And then the other thing that's interesting for us is hiring. I mean, how do people, I know hiring is not really top of agenda in a time where there's economic downturn, but for a company like ours, hiring still is an engine you can't turn off, because when you turn off, it really is not helpful next year, because we have to hire for next year. How do you hire in a moment like this? Well, actually, you have to come up with approaches that can potentially be more gender blind. Need to think about how to not look at CVs and so forth, because you're much more reliant on electronic methods where even CVs and so forth can have a gendered response. So there are all these things that we're looking at in terms of how do we hire, and even offering greater fellowships and other types of things in a moment like this, which allow us to lean forward in terms of the types of people that we hire, right? And those are things that potentially beyond COVID-19 can continue, because we suddenly learn that actually we've been biased in our approach to hiring, because we're being forced into trialing new things. Of course, trialing new things means new bias can be introduced. So it's really important to continue thinking about the learnings from the past.
Thank you. Who's going now? Gaynor?
Yeah, sure. Just making sure I'm not on mute. For us, I think this crisis has shown that we're only as strong as our most vulnerable. So one of the great things that I've seen our company do, and one of the reasons I'm so proud to work for Accor and have been here for 20 odd years, thanks for mentioning that, is that we set up a fund, an All Heartist fund, to give back to those people who have been furloughed or stood down or who have lost income as a result of this. And as we all know, hospitality tends to have those most vulnerable people working in this sector anyway. So we have a lot of women, a lot of minorities, and we've already had 10,000 applications for some funding through that fund, and we've already given out over 6,000, 7,000 sums of money to those people. And they tend to be in those poorer communities, a lot of women affected. You mentioned providing shelter for men or women during the crisis in Australia and in France, and on a more casual basis in Asia Pacific. We've been offering shelter at our hotels for homeless people, and also for victims of domestic abuse. So it's interesting to hear the other side of it, that perhaps I don't think the men should be going into shelter, they should be going to prison. But certainly it's a safe space for women who can't stay at home and their children. And it's interesting because, pardon me, I'll be talking a lot on conference calls, so I'm losing my voice. But a lot of women are actually, older women are the fastest growing sector of homelessness. You know, that people don't think of that when they think of homeless people. So we've had a lot of those women staying in our hotels as well during this crisis. And my hope is that we've all become more human, I think, through this. We're looking for companies that are human and that are authentic. And I think after this, hopefully, we'll see more of that coming through. And that means if we're going to appeal to human beings, we need to show human beings from every part of society. And that means reflecting for our guests who they are. If they want to come and feel safe in our hotels, they're going to feel safe if they see someone who looks like them, can speak their language. So of course, diversity and inclusion become important for that.
Thank you. And Roshit?
Yeah, so I thought I'll go last and say that I agree with both the other speakers who said this. I totally agree. Everything around flexibility in the work and similar topics are of paramount importance. But the one other aspect that I wanted to talk about is really if we have to look at gender equality, gender parity, gender equity at work, it should really start at home. And now, because of the COVID and there's a greater understanding of the role that women play by men, greater understanding by men of the role that women play in the household. And for example, in India, we launched a campaign that is called Gender Equity Starts at Home. So all the men, for example, were doing the various other household chores, supporting their children, cooking, cleaning, etc., to raise that importance of understanding or the realization of what is happening, which never really happened until, for example, it happened probably soon after the World War II, where men came back home following the war, and then women were employed. They had to take care of the children as things happened. So there was a lot of parenting time that happened. So it's really on the behavior and the mindset change that is happening, that has been triggered significantly through this COVID-19 crisis, that will bring about a lot of changes, because if there is equity at home, the women at work feel more empowered. They don't have to think about too much of what is happening at home, and can think about growth and advancement, for example, within their own workforce. And that way, the whole leakage that is happening in the pyramidal model of pipeline, of more women at the bottom of the pyramid, and as they grow up, there's the leakage that is happening. That will be So I firmly believe this crisis will accelerate certain positive behaviors, and this is one such behavior where there'll be more leadership positions coming out of the self-realization by men in support of women, and therefore the century-long wait pre-COVID to get to gender parity will be further accelerated to advance. So that was my only point.
Thank you very much, Rashid, and to all of you. I think it was very interesting to have this thought from you. Now, I would like to invite Shama Nasir, gender specialist at UNDP Bangkok Regional Hub, to tell us a bit more about a new tool that UNDP is developing to support companies in these areas. Shama, over to you.
Thank you, Liviana. It's been great to hear our speakers talk about today how existing gender inequalities and challenges women face are aggravated by the current crisis, and how this is having an impact on the female labor force, whether it be as a result of the additional care burden, increase in incidents of gender-based violence, and also as a result of the digital gender divide. We've heard about how existing D&I policies actually have helped to support and protect workforce during this time, and also how existing measures can be tweaked to really address the gendered impact of COVID-19, because if you don't address it, there's a huge risk of seeing a reduction in female labor force participation across the globe, and also losing the recent gains we've made in women's equal participation. We've also heard from the speakers about how D&I measures not only support your female staff, but also how it can have a positive impact on the company's overall performance, whether it be how productive companies are in terms of market value, revenues, and also how a diverse workforce can also attract a strong pool of talent, and also foster an environment of new ideas and innovation as well. So this program that has been developed by UNDP has been really designed within this context, and we hope that the program can be a tool for private sector companies, not only to partner with UNDP to contribute to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, but really for it to be an opportunity for private sector companies to go from gender equality commitment to action, and also to provide evidence of your gender mainstreaming efforts to address workplace inequality. Again, I think the current, we would all agree that the current crisis presents a key opportunity for companies to really support women across your value chains and become leaders in providing gender equal COVID-19 response and recovery. If you look at the program, we have a 4-step process. Step 1 is really focusing on the assessment, where we will be partnering with interested private sector companies through a cross-functional team, representative of D&I, HR, recruitment, to gather the information we need for the assessment, as well as supporting us in rolling out a staff opinion survey. Step 2 is very much focusing on, once that information is gathered, identifying and analyzing the data to see where the gaps are, and coming up with tailored recommendations to really address that gap. Step 3 is implementation. So UNDP would continue to support the private sector company to ensure that these recommendations are rolled out in a timely manner, and necessary support can be provided, as mentioned, whether it be in the form of unconscious bias training, capacity building trainings, or technical expertise to develop a strategy or policy. And in the last step, it's to ensure monitoring and evaluation, which is really cross-cutting across all the steps. And the analysis would give us the data we need to establish the baseline, and the implementation will really help us to monitor progress against these baselines. The program includes 12 key areas of improvement within a company's operations, where we feel like really we can create a transformative impact. It will be through a range of equal opportunity, affirmative action, and gender mainstreaming measures. We will be working with the companies, and they will commit to identifying and eliminating gender-based wage gaps, increasing women's role in decision-making in the middle and upper management positions, developing and implementing policies to improve work-life balances, really working to create a more inclusive culture and positive behavior towards different and diverse environment, and creating a zero tolerance on sexual harassment in the workplace. And we hope that by working on these key issues, we will be able to work with the companies to mainstream gender equality in their organizational management across the companies, and ensure equal opportunities for both men and women, and remove discriminatory practices. In terms of next steps of the program, we're really looking to pilot the program with interested selected companies in the region this year, and aiming for the full program to be rolled out in the region next year. In the slide, I've included contact details of myself as well as my colleagues, so do please feel free to get in touch if you would like a more detailed overview of the program, or if your company is interested to partner with us on this initiative. Thank you, Liviana.
Thank you, Shama, very much for this presentation. I would like to give the floor back to Ko, who is helping to collate the questions for our panelists.
Thank you, Liviana. So Gaurav, Roshi, and Gaino, thanks so much for the excellent presentations or the talk. Very nice, very informative. But one thing that I think one cannot miss from what you've been saying is that all of your companies have been working on promoting gender equality at workplace way before the crisis started. And I think it's really important to keep in mind to be agile enough to respond to the crisis with stepped up efforts. You needed that groundwork done, and I think it really showed. And it's really something that we can look up to as a role model as well. Now, I have 3 general questions to the panelists from the audience. Please pick and choose which one you want to answer. And then there's one specifically addressed to Gaurav. And so the 3 general questions, in large companies, we see measures being taken to give flexibility to women due to some increased stress and work, unpaid work responsibility, and etc. But it's not always the case for smaller companies or perhaps SMEs in your supply chain. So what could be done, in your view, by large multinational companies to support SMEs, particularly those who are in the supply chain of those multinational companies, to make sure that these measures can also be replicated. And the second question is, when some measures, and not just necessarily COVID response measures, but measures to make sure women are have an enabling environment at workplace, isn't always consulted or designed with the voices of women themselves. And because the final say is with the companies. But these measures may or may not be producing the outcome that they are supposed to be originally intended. And so how do you propose that they can be measured, their effectiveness can be measured if they are not really incorporating the voices of women? And the third question is, what might be the most difficult challenge you foresee for your company in the post-COVID time for female workforce in your companies, and how CSR or SIA with joint efforts with other departments in your companies can work together? And then there's also a question about the role of alcohol abuse. And I think Roshit mentioned that it is a concern, and it is considered a trigger for domestic violence and abuse. So what might be an effective measure to address this? So actually I said 4, sorry. Oh, and Goram, one particular question for you. When you give advice to your clients, which are designed through the gender lens, how are they received? Do you get positive reaction? Do you get resistance? Would be interesting to hear. Thank you. Any one of the speakers, I think.
I'll take the first question around the SMEs and how MNCs are working with SMEs on human rights and other issues along the supply chain. So, for example, in Sodexo, we have our supplier inclusion program, where we say that 10 billion will contribute to the benefit of these SMEs. So these are smallholder groups, small and medium scale enterprises, social enterprises, women-owned business, minority businesses, etc. However, having said that, we said that we will not compromise our standards when we work with the SMEs, be it from a food safety, be it from a human rights policy, be it from anti-corruption, forced labor, etc., etc. So all the standards are still expected out of the same SMEs as it would be for any other suppliers. So there's no differentiation or special treatment. What could be challenging for SMEs is understanding what are the big MNCs standards. So we do organize separate training or separate workshops or separate information session. We run through with the SME groups, what are the standards expected? And if they're able to meet the standards, we'll start working with them immediately. But if they're not, it's almost like skilling them and training them to the requirement where they are able to come and contribute to Sodexo.
Thank you, Rashid. Gaynor, I see.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I was just going to say, what we do a lot is to celebrate the successes of our women. So we have produced collaterals, books, materials, posters showcasing our women leaders and giving the example. We also have an ethics policy that we share with all of our suppliers, and I think we could take that further as well. At the moment, a lot around protecting the environment, perhaps more than it is with promoting women's businesses. Like I'd like to hear more about what Sodexo is doing in that area. And I think seeking out suppliers who there's plenty of women out there doing amazing things. So seeking out suppliers who can provide that new supply chain for us is a great way. Communicating, you know, because we work across so many countries and cultures, it's really pushing those messages where we don't have those equalities that we have in some parts. You know, Asia Pacific, you know, we've talked a little bit about India, and I don't want to just look at India, but it's important that people see that women and men are not just equal, but, you know, if you look at how some of the leaders have handled this COVID crisis. Some of the best countries have been led by women. So you look at New Zealand, you look at Finland, and these are young women. These are, Taiwan, Norway. These are not old white guys. These are young women who are giving a new impetus and showing that you can lead and care for people. And I think that's something that the world is going to need more than ever now. We're going to need a more human face of business, a more caring, kind face of business. And I think women bring that. So, we should all be looking for that.
Great point. Thank you. Gaurav?
Well, let me answer that, the direct question that was asked. So I think bringing that sort of gender disaggregated advice has not been a challenge. And for the simple reason that it's just better advice, right? Like that's what clients are paying you for, and then they see it. Right? You present data in front of them saying, this is how this is going to be differentially received. For them, it's like sometimes for us, it's an aha moment saying, okay, you're right, we need to redesign these things. I think that's not been challenging. What I've been challenged by the last 10 years is sometimes client environments that don't necessarily live up to the equality values that we might have, and putting our employees into those environments. I think that's where the rubber hits the road for us sometimes. We're like, okay, when do we take a call? How do we have a direct conversation with the client? And when do we pull out, right? But when it comes to advice and applying this gender lens, it's made us better, and it's, I think, made the advice for clients better. So it's not seen a huge amount of challenge in that respect. And very quickly on the question around how to incorporate women's voices in these sort of gender conversations more. I mean, just to say that, for us at a leadership level in Dalberg, actually it's not so much about gender, at least it's culture setting. Because what we say is, look, our culture is bring your true self to work. And whenever questions arise where there are some challenges that come up, we start with that frame and say, okay, are we allowing people to bring their true self to work? And that means actually, very practically, we've had to relax our clothing standards as well. We've gone through that exercise. But what it means is that that's the building block, and then it's people who are building all of our policies. All the gender stuff, and I think there have been some really remarkable policies. There have been things that I've certainly never thought about. Every 5 years you live on this planet, you get out of date with respect to what's really going on and how people are thinking. So all of those policies and so forth have been built, not necessarily by women, just by our teams working together to say, no, I'd like our firm to have these kind of gender policies. So they're not actually top down, they're largely bottom up. But I do think, to something that Gaynor was also saying, sometimes target setting just really mobilizes people. And I think that's really important, but also culture setting. So having a culture that allows that bottom-up approach, I think, is probably what we've been successful at. Everything else, the leadership cannot take any credit for.
Thank you. And I think all of your responses look into beyond the COVID time. I think as you had already started this effort before the crisis, and I think what you're now doing, obviously having the future, the post-COVID time in mind. So I can see that's how you're envisioning your future work. But I think one of the questions was particularly asking how do you go throughout your companies, not just in let's say CSR or CR area, and to engage the rest of your company to take this forward. Are there any advice that you could give?
So I can go first on that. Probably the perfect example, I won't say perfect, an example, or maybe the worst example is me. And the reason I say that was because my day job is corporate responsibility, but the company has suddenly entrusted corporate responsibility to drive or lead the project on the return to work as part of the COVID. So once again, it showcases the role that corporate responsibility, but also how that can function as a backbone with other departments to get things done. One of the biggest issues that I think we would face is right now with the layoffs or the furloughs, more women are getting laid off, especially in that sector, because there are predominantly more women in that space. And they go back to their homes, end up doing homeschooling for their kids, or taking care of a senior or a child at home. when things start back, it will be a difficult task to get them back, because they could be ending up more used to that way of life and find it difficult to get back into the workforce when we really need them to get back, or the women to get back into the workforce. But they're also facing many issues today. For example, if both men and women are working at home, and now it's online learning, so the kid needs the laptop or some form of communication. So naturally, which is the laptop that is being taken? Is it the man's laptop? Is it the woman's laptop? So there are lots of things that needs to be considered. And the more they stay out of this, end up doing, and the more children you have, it makes it even more complicated. So the key part here is getting them back into the workforce would be key. And therefore, the role of human resources will become almost the role of social capital for the company.
Great answer. Thank you. Very helpful. Now, Gaynor, you said you may have a question to Roshit. So let's go. This is your chance to ask that question.
I actually thought that was something I would take offline with him, because I see we're running out of time.
Okay. Gaurav, is there any question that you want to ask to the rest of the panelists? Your co-panelists?
No, look, I think the question, there's already a list of questions that are the audience is asking. I mean, I can dive into one quick one. There's a lot of interest in alcohol. And so I think just one reality to understand is we've got a huge fiscal stimulus happening in every country. In countries with very low tax bases, alcohol is a major tax base. And so you have this really terrible problem where in some ways, one of the easiest ways to quickly get money back into the government is to open up alcohol shops. Whereas, but then at the same time suffer very short and long-term challenges from a social perspective. And there's definitely some linkages there already being formed between shops opening up, alcohol shops opening up, and gender violence on the increase. But this is a wicked problem because we also need government to deliver services, and you cannot reconstruct the tax base in response to a crisis. You're stuck with what you have. So that's part of the dynamics that's going on, and especially for states. In India, states are larger than most countries, right? So we have to figure that one out.
Yes.
If I can add on to the alcohol issue. So prohibition that happened was never known to solve the alcohol selling issue. People were making alcohol in their own bathtubs. And neither did it stop male-linked violence. So I don't think a blanket ban of selling is the answer. There are many other ways to get things done. But since Gaurav also spoke about the financial rollout of the stimulus plan and so on, it sparked something else, that today the governments are putting stimulus or other plans for companies that are severely impacted, including airlines, including fossil fuel, oil and gas, and others. But the ones who are really essential in the world today are the frontline staff, be it the healthcare, the 70% healthcare professionals and others who are risking their life to get things done. The real question is, what's the amount of that package that goes into the healthcare workers or other service workers who are really at the front line, not just claps from the balcony and others, but really from a financial standpoint, what's the benefit for them? So that's the question.
Great, thank you. I think it's always important. I mean, we do zooming in this webinar, zooming in on a particular gender equality issue, but we must not forget that we need to look at in the bigger perspectives. It's all an integrated part of our society, and just pressing one button will also influence many other buttons in the society. So, but great conversations. I think I will now give the microphone back to Liviana.
Thank you all the participants for their active participation and asking several interesting questions. Thanks, of course, to our speakers, Gaurav, Gaynor, Roshit. You really made this webinar, I think, very meaningful and informative for many people. For those who have to leave, we will be sending also the recording of the webinar, so maybe they can catch up with the last few minutes. And another thing, we have shared in the chat the link to a survey and actually also this QR code that you see now. We really hope that you can fill it in. It's a very short survey, but it will help us to get an idea of how much you like this or find it interesting, and if you want more webinars of this kind, because we are very happy to have this conversation with the business sector representatives. And finally, thanks again to all of you. Thanks also to the UK government for the support that it gives to the project. And we talk about this in the diversity and inclusion platform of the Fair Business Environment project, because there is no fair business if there is no equality among men and women, equal opportunities to contribute and to make prosperity a reality for companies and for the communities at large. So one more time, thank you everyone, and see you maybe next time. Thank you, bye.
Thank you, bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, stay safe.